Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon, and today it's time to have a look at another one of these very hyped new cards from the latest set Burning Shadows. It's going to be Golisopod, and we're pairing him up with Decidueye GX, another fan favourite card. I'll talk about why we choose this partner rather than a few others later, but for now let's start off with the basic concept of the deck. Golisopod GX on the right of your screen is going to be a real contender, I believe, for Worlds because he does provide amazing early game tempo and output. While we still have Forest around, he can do 120 damage just by evolving up via Forest, attaching a single energy and getting himself into the active position. Very easy to do, and for that we are able to deal 120 baseline of damage. We then have Choice Band and we also have Decidueye support in here to hopefully ramp up into, if not one-hit KOs, very close to one-hit KOs, so in future turns, Feather Arrows can finish things off. So, first impression is amazing tempo, and it's something that we haven't seen from a Decidueye deck as of yet. It's only really expanded where we see things like the Latios Donk style deck, where you're trying to spam lots of Decidueye Feather Arrows and attack really quickly with Fast Raid. Golisopod actually has a similar feel, because you're trying to set up this guy for a single energy, you deal a lot of damage, and then the Feather Arrows are supplementary. Whereas previously, we've seen Vileplume, which is a turbo engine, but the damage output is rarely as quick. Even if you do happen to start with Lugia or Tapu Lele, it's only really looking to do like 60 damage or so, maybe. Especially because the Vileplume list doesn't play Choice Band, it's around that sort of number. Golisopod is much, much higher. 120 with the option to go to 150 with the band, and then Feather Arrows on top. You can start KOing from your first turn of the game if you're going second, which is impeccably dangerous and why we're building the deck. And similarly, the Ninetales archetype just pretty much wants to beacon for the first few turns, so it's a real different outlook for Decidueye. He is now much more of a support role, where the Feather Arrows are just going to be ramping up damage and making sure targets are in range for Golisopod's first impression. There's also another couple of good attacks. The Armor Press can help out for things that can hit 210, but bear in mind, at the same time, we could just start attaching to Decidueye as well. He's proven himself to be a good attacker. And the Crossing Cut GX is also a really powerful option in the deck, letting you do 150, and switching this guy to the bench is also a great thing that we can go for, because again, we can ramp up that 150 to 180 with a band, and Feather Arrows on top means we can sometimes get one-hit KOs on even the biggest of Pokemon, so very, very good card. And basically we're trying to get really aggressive first impressions, start destroying your opponent's Pokemon before they even set them up, really. And that's what we're going to be trying to do here. We then have the annoying sort of damage removal aspect of the deck, which is where we try and set our opponent back even further. We're going to be racing for prizes with first impression, whilst at the same time, any damage that we get dealt, as long as we don't get one shot on Golisopods, we're going to be using Acerolas and Super Scoop-Ups in here to try and recycle it, put it all back down into play because of Forest, get him back into the active position, and start all over again with first impressions. So not only are we doing really early output, we are also preventing our opponent's damage being done to us in the early turns. So very, very dangerous combination. And of course, I mentioned Crossing Cut, but also because we have the partner of Decidueye, we can benefit from Hollow Hunt as well. And there'll be a couple of card counts in this list that you may think are a little low here or there, a little bit cheeky. But you have to bear in mind, Hollow Hunt can get these counts if they're important enough in certain matchups. So there we go, that's the basic concept of the deck. A much more aggressive version of previous Decidueye lists, and Decidueye is much more of a supporting role. So let's talk about why I'm using Decidueye over the Lurantis promo. These are the two sort of grass-style partners that we've seen be mentioned with Golisopod. There's also the Evolution build, which Jack's going to be going through in not too far away. Well, pretty soon, I should say. So yeah, I've chosen to go for Decidueye over Lurantis. There are reasons for both, as you can see. The main reason why I want to use Decidueye rather than Lurantis is because you don't waste damage counters. Placing Feather Arrows doesn't have to be the active position, which means you can be targeting lower HP Pokemon on the bench. And because there's a lot more evolutions in this format, you can actually, you know, target these evolutions and take easy prizes on them. Or even just set things up like Gardevoirs for when they eventually come into the active position, take a one-hit knockout. Because Golisopod only commits one energy to himself, he effectively has 180 HP against the Guardi, and that's a lot of commitment on their side, energy-wise, to one-shot it. So hopefully we have a lot of Feather Arrows on that Guardy so that we can come in with our next attacker and just deal with it in one hit. So that's the idea. We don't waste damage by having Decidueye, whereas Lurantis, potentially, that damage can be wasted, because if they just have a 60 HP Pokemon in the active, you set up a Lurantis, you're doing 140, that doesn't matter, it's a KO regardless. But if it's a Decidueye, it means you've done your 120 to the active, and that 20 can be placed more optimally elsewhere. Like I said, the Holo Hunt's a great option for the deck, and it can help us spam important cards. And I also mentioned earlier, 210 HP is a barrier that a few decks can get over. 240 is much harder, so Decidueye is also accustomed to being a main attacker in the deck. We already play Grass Energy, we already play DC. There's nothing wrong with setting up Decidueyes as well in certain matchups, so it gives us a second dimension, which the Lurantis build kind of doesn't. So Golisopod with Lurantis just kind of flops if it goes up against things that can hit 210, because your entire strategy is based around Acerola-ing and scoop-upping, and if they get over that 210 baseline, it's a lot harder for you to win the game, basically. However, Lurantis does give you deck slots, and it's much more easy to get set up on like turn 1 or 2. So if you want to be like the most aggressive build, I guess, quote unquote, you have a couple more speedy cards in the list, you have more space for Trainer's Mails, more space for Ball Search cards. The Lurantis may be the more consistent list, and is more searchable to get going in the first place, but I believe it's slightly weaker. Also, there's a benefit that you can move into Lurantis after using a Crossing Cut GX as a non-EX to try and force the 7 prize game, which you can't really do with Decidueye, but you can bring up Decidueye because it has so much HP anyway, and we're already playing lots of Acerolas, lots of scoop-ups, so kind of a moot point there. But overall, that's why my thought process is around Decidueye over Lurantis. I know there's a bit of a debate going on which is better. I think you have to cut a few corners in the list by fitting in the Decidueye pieces, and you'll see where I've made these sort of decisions in the list, and it may look a little bit ugly for some people, whereas the Lurantis may look a little bit cleaner overall. I believe the power level is higher using Decidueye. He's proven himself all season how powerful this ability is, so I just want to jam him in the deck and just roll with it. So there we are, a quick debate over Decidueye or Lurantis. Who knows, eventually I might also make a Lurantis deck profile, but for now I feel Decidueye is the superior option if you are going for a full grass route. Personally, I actually really like the evolutions in here, so that you have outs to things like Volcanion and such, but that's a video for Jack to talk about why we like the EVs, but for now, just focusing on the Decidueye build. So, let's get into the list. First of all, the main Pokemon. We're playing a 3-3 line of the Golisopod GX. The new Wimpod has that amazing ability, Wimp Out. If it is the first turn, it has free retreat, which really helps you. It means that this is the optimum starter alongside a Tapu Koko that we play in the deck as well, which naturally has free retreat. So the idea is that we get the Wimpod, and we then have to find a second Wimpod, evolve that into a Golisopod, and move into the active, so that we can use First Impression on turn 1. Only playing a 3-3 line means it's not hugely consistent. One thing I would really love in the deck is a 4th Wimpod, but for now we're stuck with the 3-3 line. And then we have the 3-3-3 Decidueye line as well, because we want to get these out in potentially like 2 ofs. It's rare that you have more bench space than getting 2 Decidueye going, as well as a Golisopod, but that's kind of what I aim for. The 3-3-3 allows us to do that, it allows us to discard pieces as well along the way. So he is definitely the more supplementary role than we've seen in previous builds, where the 4-4-4 has been necessary, because you want to get as many out as possible. Here, you do still want to get a couple out, but bench space-wise, you pretty much have to settle for 2 a lot of the time. If you've got all 3 out, you've been pretty fortunate in the game, and you feel like you've got a really good board state at that point. So yeah, I think for space-wise, this is what we've had to sort of compromise on. It's not hugely consistent to get the turn 1 First Impression, but it's quite consistent, and we play lots of switch cards anyway. If we don't lead one Wimpod, we can hopefully, find another one. Okay, next up we have the support Pokemon. 2 Tapu Lele, as well as 2 Shaymin EX. We're playing heavy Super Scoop Up in here, which is why I'm going for 2 Shaymin. Other Decidueye decks, like the Vileplume, they play Shaymin EX because of the item lock. They're not hugely scared of the Shaymins getting picked off, or they just sort of need that dominant board state. Here, because we're trying to guarantee this First Impression for really early tempo, we're going to be using Shaymin as well. But because we can scoop up the Shaymins off the board, we can remove this as easy prize targets later on if need be. And the Tapu Lele is not only a great consistency card, it's also, again, as always, that energy drive attacker. We are playing DCs in here, so it can also be an attacking threat. If you just lead a Wimpod, don't hit your pieces for Golisopod, you can just DC a Lele and start swinging as well. So yeah, really good card. And then finally that one-off Tapu Koko that I mentioned just a moment ago. He is a natural free retreater, so once we have used a Scoop Up or an Acerola, we would like to promote the Tapu Koko. Then we can use Forest to put down one Wimpod, one Golisopod, attach Grass, move back into the active and attack. So he is a great combo maker for the deck. Additionally, we've seen him in other Decidueye lists. The Ninetales list commonly runs one of these cards because that flying flip is also so great, because we can again target lower HP Pokemon by setting up a few Decidueyes, flying flipping whilst feather arrowing to finish things off as well. So it gives us a pretty good early game win condition by taking lots of early prizes, even if you don't get the Golisopod out. So Koko also a very strong card. Onto the items, we are playing a one-of Revitaliser. I'm choosing Revitaliser over Rescue Stretcher because we only have 3 counts of all of our grass dudes instead of like 4 counts, which is typically seen. And I believe that the Revitaliser is slightly more important than getting back things like Lele's, Shaymins, or the one-off Koko for now. One of the tech cards I will mention is actually just putting a Rescue Stretcher in, because it could be important enough to play a split of both Revitaliser and Stretcher like we've seen in previous Decidueye builds. I'm really not against that idea, but for now I believe Revitaliser is the stronger of the two. Just the one copy of Field Blower. This is an interesting one. Because we have Guzma, and because we can attack for knockouts with Golisopod now, it's very different to other Decidueye builds. Other Decidueye builds can't one-hit KO a Garbotoxin Garbodor without the use of Feather Arrows, either before Garbotoxin comes down onto Trubishes, or after, when they Lysander or Guzma up the Garbodor. You also have to get rid of the tool so you can Feather Arrow and attack for the knockout, unless you're using like a Deep Hurricane, for example. So we can get away with just playing one Field Blower because we could just simply Guzma, retreat back into our Golisopod, hit 120 on it, and then it's dealt with a little bit more efficiently. So the one-off Field Blower plus the GX attack, the Hollow Hunt, we can recover it if we need to, but one of our much more reasonable win conditions or lines of play against Garbodors these days is just going to be Guzma KO, because it's so easy for Golisopod to reach that number. We are then playing 2 VS Seeker. Like the Decidueye Ninetales, I'm a big fan of playing a lower VS Seeker count because, again, we have Hollow Hunt to fall back on to recover these important supporter cards. And then we are playing a 4/4 count of Super, Scoop Up, and Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball obviously necessary for setting us up, getting us Shaymins, Lele's, and our main attackers. Super Scoop Up is a real core card for the deck. It's a card that you want to see every turn of the game, pretty much. If you don't lead Koko or Wimpod, you pretty much need to move your active Pokemon on turn 1. Scoop Up is one of the main ways we can do that. We also play Guzmas, and we also play Floatstone and Acerola. But if it's turn 1, it's unlikely that we have damage on our own Pokemon in the active. So really, it's going to be down to Scoop Up whether or not we can move our active. But bear in mind this, if you haven't led with Wimpod or Koko, you either have led with 3 Rowlet, which is your worst case scenario, or one of your 2 Shaymins, or one of your 2 Tapu Leles. In both of these circumstances, Super Scoop Up is perfect for you because you can still then pick up, move Wimpod into the active, evolve into Golisopod. No, sorry, it should already be a Golisopod. So you can Scoop Up and then move your Golisopod active. And then you can draw cards off the Shaymin or get a supporter that you just picked up with the Tapu Lele. So even on turn 1, it's excellent for you as long as you don't lead Rowlet. And then it's going to be used for healing off damaged Golisopods during turns, and it resets your single energy attack first impression, which is amazing for you. As well as, again, in these early cycle turns, you can just use more Shaymins. So that's why you're not seeing any Trainer's Mail in here, because instead I'm going for the Scoop Up route, where we can pick up a Shaymin, draw 4 more cards on the heads flip. So it's a card that you want to kind of use sparingly, but because we want to get the big combo going as quickly as possible, you can spam through like 2 or 3 Scoop Ups turn 1 just to reuse Shaymins, like we saw with like previous like Shaymin Toad lists back when Trump card was around. It's pretty crazy. But yeah, Scoop Up is amazing at all points in the game. I love the card, and it's just like the core of the deck, really. So for tools, we then have just the 1 copy of Floatstone. because we have so many Acerola, because we have 4 Scoop Up, that we can Hollow Hunt back, remember. I feel only 1 Floatstone is mandatory, especially because we're going to have more than likely a Choice Band on our attacking Golisopod, and that's the thing that we have to retreat over and over again. So instead, just the 2 Choice Band. Because we're Scoop Upping and Acerolaing, we are recovering the Choice Band, so it's only really Field Blower that gets rid of our tool. So I believe only 2 is mandatory. I kind of would like 3 just for aggressiveness and just for access early, but really I think it just gets outclassed by speedy cards or consistency cards or whatever. So for now, just the 2 Choice Band. It's only really Field Blower that gets rid of it, and again, as I keep going back to, Hollow Hunt is an option just for adding up some damage. And the 4 Frosted Giant Plants, it's essential. It's essential in many turns in the game because there are times when you don't have a bench space for that second Wimpod just to chill there. You would rather it be a Decidueye, or sometimes it just has to be a Lele or a Shaymin. So you need the forest so that you can scoop up and put everything back down, all your Golisopod pieces at once, attach energy and start swinging again. So it's a really important card, not only for turn 1, but for most turns if you want to be in this cycle. For supporters, we are playing 1 Brigette. Brigette is actually potentially quite slow in here. It's amazing when you go first and can't attack. That's why it's in the deck, really, as the one-of. But because we have Shaymin draw as well, sometimes all you need is, like, a Wimpod. So you can Lele Brigette, and then you can get into Golisopod if you have a decent enough hand, and you can just rely on Shaymin to get you, you know, your scoop up or your means of retreating or whatever else. A way to find forest, all these sorts of things. You can rely on Shaymin to dig as well on turn 1 without using a draw supporter. So Brigette is really nice, but its primary use is when we go first in matchups, because we just get the setup and we pretty much guarantee ourselves a first impression going second with this card. So really, really good stuff. We are playing double Guzma. It's amazing. Obviously with Golisopod, it's another combo card for you, as well as being able to target your opponent's Pokemon. 2N, only the 2 count, because so often once you have this cycle going, all you want to do is keep your hand and reuse this other supporter that you see the 3 count of, which is Acerola. Acerola, whenever your Pokemon is damaged, you can just pick it back up and pretty much plonk the Golisopod all back down. And that's really the combo that we go for, so I like seeing Acerola much more than I like N, because especially because of how aggressive this deck is. You don't really want to end like yourself to 4 cards very often. It's a very weak play for you. N is still a good early game card to an extent, but Acerola is the card you want to see much more frequently. I've considered going down to just 1 N and playing a 3rd Guzma or another Acerola, because I believe these are so important. But that's really up to you, down to testing. For now, I felt 2 was kind of okay because I'm only playing 2 VS Seeker, and it's still an important enough card to find when your combo hasn't been going well and you've been dropping prizes. You're still going to try and stabilize the board via N. The 3 Acerola is just amazing. Not only Golisopod, but also picking up things like Decidueye, which can happily tank hits. It means that you can like use your Hollow Hunt, take a hit, then Acerola it back up and play it all back down. And yeah, it's just really cool. Really great card in the deck. And for Professor Sycamore, just for the speedy aggressive draw, as we all know, we need to hit a lot of combo pieces turn 1. Sycamore's going to help us get there. And finally, we are playing 9 energy, 3 of them being double colorless. Don't feel like the 4 count is mandatory, because we are only very rarely using Crossing Cut GX or Armor Press. It gives us the option to attack with Shaymin, Lele, and Decidueye though, so I kind of like the 3 count. The more important card, however, is the Grass Energies. You can pay retreat out of cards if you're going second, so bear that in mind. That's another reason why we can save ourselves things like super scoop ups and Acerolas down the line, because turn 1 you can just attach manually 1 energy to like a Lele that you got stuck active, or a Shaymin or whatever, and you can just pay retreat out, so that turn 2 you can still get your Golisopod. But the 6 count means we have relatively high odds to find it in the early turns with our cycles with Shaymins and Sycamores, so we can get this first impression going as quickly as possible, and that's pretty much the aim of the game. So I like this split. You could potentially try a 4-5, or you can just go to a 3-5, see how much you don't like, see how much that hurts you. If you put in another speed card, maybe like a Trainer's Mail, an Acrobike, something along these lines, I wouldn't hate it. Maybe even just a 4th Wimpod for an extra good lead. I wouldn't hate it. It's just that your likelihood of first impression, it's just another thing that you need to dig for a little bit harder sometimes. I know that Shintaro's list of Golisopod Decidueye, his was XY on, so the list was very different because it played Compressor, Revitaliser Engine, but he played even fewer count of energy than we do right now. Maybe that's because it had a larger card pool and he could draw through his deck much quicker, because he could thin his own deck of basically Pokemon because he could compress them away and then recover them. So I feel this deck doesn't draw quite as well as that list, which is why we need to increase the physical energy count, in my opinion. So, putting it all together, this is the full list. Pause the video now if you want to see it, and take note of it or whatever. Take your screenshots so that you can test this out. I think the floating slots, if any, the third Acerola, the sixth Grass Energy, I think those are the two main slots that I have. I believe this list is very, very, very tight, because we have tried to jam in quite a lot of stuff. It's a tight enough list trying to fit a 2-1 line of Ninetales in two Decidueye lists, so you can see how many compromises we've had to make along the way to fit this Golisopod. But I believe overall definitely worth it because his attack is just so powerful, and this combination with Scoop Up and Acerola is dirty when your opponent basically doesn't have an answer to it a lot of the time. So just like I did with Guardy, let's have a look at the matchups for this guy. I've again put the crosses next to the potential awkward matchups. Volcanion obviously awkward because they have weakness on us. Our main win condition there is potentially we can Golisopod plus Decidueye to KO early non-EX Volcanions before they've been able to Power Heater and attach energy to the bench, and then we can potentially ramp out on them early on. We can additionally use Decidueye to ping off Star U for an easy prize here and there. But overall, we get out-tempoed. Our win condition basically is to load up like Lele and try to Feather Arrow KO Volcanions in a row and maybe end them out of the game, but it's very awkward. Golisopod EVs, I've said, are slight unfavourable. Because they're going to have the Flareon, they get one hits, and that pretty much renders all of our scoop-ups, etc. useless. Additionally, because we're playing two Shaymin, they can Guzma quite effectively and take two prizes, which is worrying. But I only believe it's slightly unfavoured because it's not long until we are able to Guzma up their Flareon, or even just Decidueye ping down their evolutions. And when we're able to do that, we can take the easy prizes and gain momentum because we, again, can scoop up an Acerola to our heart's content. It's kind of like a combination of the two decks doing the same thing to one another. It's just we have more damage once their evolutions go. Decidueye Vileplume, probably difficult, but it's more of who goes first. Plus, even under Plume, you can out-hit them sometimes with Golisopod. Decidueye Ninetales, I believe, is fairly unfavourable because they have the option to go for the Koko Espeon EX route. We are the much more aggressive, but Decidueye Ninetales is very efficient at ending the opponent out of the game, retaining the board state, and making it hard for us to continue. And the deck, it is very aggressive, and we have a lot of outs to end, but it is awkward. Sometimes you are left with turns where you're not getting the full value from first impression, and that is very awkward. And the final bad matchup would be Mega Rayquaza. It's really down to us to pretty much ignore our Decidueyes, and we have to... Well, it depends. If we God Draw, we can go for plenty of Decidueyes and try and ping down Shaymin EXs whilst we're using first impression on other Shaymins. But otherwise, you just go as aggressive as possible to get that first impression and start hitting Shaymin EXs. That is really your only win condition. Mega Ray are always going to put down lots of Shaymin for you. They have to get to the 210 or the 240 HP barrier. So our win condition is going to be replace Stadium, Lysander, or well, I should say Guzma up Shaymins for knockouts, and that's how we're going to try and stay in the race. Because we have Revitaliser, we can just recover Golisopods quite quickly, so it feels like it would be a trade-on-trade sort of thing. If Mega Ray ever misses a turn of Stadium, or if we ever miss a turn of like Guzmaring, it feels really grim. I feel Mega Ray should overall be the favoured party there, because they can keep using non-Lysander supporters and actually draw through their deck, whereas we have to Guzma a lot of the time, unless we have enough Decidueyes in play to where we can ping down Shaymins for additional prizes. So overall, it feels pretty unfavoured to me. Everything else seems fairly okay. I think Espeon Garbodor was one I was close to saying is a bad matchup, but because we can Guzma up Flareons or Guzma up Garbodors much better than previously, I believe that would still be close. And even from my testing with Decidueye Ninetales against Espeon, that's already like a 50-50. So I wouldn't put it as a bad matchup, but it would, however, be a headache of a matchup, I believe, to navigate through. Right, let's finish off once again with a few tech cards. There's nothing wrong with you trying to splash in the Espeon EX. We hit 120 as a baseline, and that's good enough to knock out things for just 1 energy with future Miraculous Shines, which is cool, whilst again we can be using the Decidueye to ping off other things, so there's no reason why the Espeon couldn't fit in here. An alternative is playing the Lunatone. This could improve your Metagross, it could improve your Guardy if they are playing max potions like we do. It can improve your Vikavolt Tapu Bulu as well because they can't get any of the healing going, and that's going to be really good for you because against things with that amount of HP you will be two-shotting with the Golisopods, so denying their heal is going to be great. Against Metagross I don't think it's necessary because we'll be healing a lot as well because they're capped at 180 with Band, so it shouldn't be a huge issue for us to play Lunatone, but I just thought I'd throw it in here as a potential option. Another one I should have put actually was Sudowoodo just because Ray is awkward. But a few items. The Stretcher I already mentioned. This can also improve your Rayquaza. If you play Stretcher and potentially a third choice band, you can go aggressive Baby Koko to also pick off Shaymins when need be. So yeah, a Stretcher is in general quite a good card, but it can also recover the Tapu Koko in that specific matchup to improve it. And then there's the Ball Search cards of Level Balls, Timer Balls, and Trainer's Mail, which could help you get set up that much more quickly, that much more often. Have to be careful about your item usage because Garbodor is still likely going to be around if they figure out a way to beat Guardy consistently, which I believe there are a few ways that I've theoried out at least, so I believe there will still be Garbodor at Worlds most likely. So we have to be careful about item usage, and for now I've opted to just go for higher scoop up count over Trainer's Mails, but I could see you guys trying to play those as well. And the final tech is Hex, helping out Mirrors, helping out Vikabulu, Metagross, Guardy, a bunch of things really, even Volk to an extent, so they can't just Power Heat to KO a Golisopod. That would be really grim for you. So Hex helps out in a bunch of places. It's just, where do I find the space? I mentioned the only 2 slots available from what it seemed was the Grass Energy, which is already quite a painful cut, and the Acerola, which also seems like a painful cut. So yeah, it just feels like a really tight deck list, and although you can consider some of these tech options, you really have to weigh up whether it's worth taking out those other cards in its place, because I believe my list right now is pretty streamlined, and it's still fairly clunky at times, so you do have to be careful if you're going to water it down further with extra turn 1 sort of bad draws of the Espeon and the Hex and the Stretcher and such. So yeah, that's all down to you guys. Let me know what you guys think of the list. Let me know what you think about the archetype. Is it one we'll definitely be seeing at Worlds? Is this the best way to play Golisopod? I'm not convinced, but I believe that Decidueye is on such a high power level that the deck could function just because of the power level of both cards, even if it has potential to clunk out here and there. So yeah, let me know what you think down below, guys, of the list, of the archetype, and anything else Burning Shadows, what you want to see next. We're going to be jamming with this until PTCGO comes out, and we can start showing off battle videos in addition to these discussions. But hope you can bear with us, and yeah, leave a like to the video if you did. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. For now, though, it has been Joe from OmniPoke, and I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.